Feral by Night is a storytelling series of eerie tales, strange houses, hauntings, weird things that happen on lonely roads, and all the things that go bump in the night. I'm Papa G, and this is Feral by Night. So turn the lights down and settle in. Some stories are better heard after dark. The first time Dottie noticed the man next door had no shadow. He was standing in the full white heat of noon. Everything around him had one. The mailbox leaned a dark rectangle across the curb. The little wire fence around his flower bed made thin black bars over the dry grass. Even the plastic grocery bags in his hands cast wrinkled shapes on the walkway. But the man himself cast nothing. Dottie stood at her kitchen sink with one hand under the faucet, letting water run over a paring knife she had already washed twice. She had seen the new neighbor before, mostly in passing. He had moved into the pale yellow house beside hers 3 weeks earlier, after the widow who owned it went into assisted living, and her children sold the place fast. His name was Everett Vale. At least, that was the name taped to one of the moving boxes left by the curb. He looked to be somewhere in his late 50s, with a narrow face, silver hair, and the kind of posture that made him seem taller than he was. He dressed neatly, even for small errands. Pressed trousers, buttoned shirts, dark shoes polished enough to catch the light. That day, the sun was brutal. The kind of sun that flattened color and made every roof glare. Dottie blinked, leaned closer to the window, and told herself the angle must be wrong. Maybe his shadow was falling straight behind him, hidden by his legs. Maybe the glare on the walkway washed it out. Then Everett Vale shifted the grocery bags from one hand to the other. The bags moved. Their shadows moved with them. He stepped forward. The shadow beneath him never appeared. Dottie turned off the faucet. The kitchen suddenly felt too quiet, except for the ticking of the cheap wall clock above the pantry door. She watched him walk up his path, unlock the front door, and go inside. The door closed behind him, and the yard looked ordinary again. That should have been the end of it. A strange trick of light. A tired woman staring too long through a window. Dottie worked from home, and some days the neighborhood became too much of her world. She knew which delivery driver sped through the stop sign. She knew which dog barked at school buses, and which trash cans got left out too long. Her attention had a way of catching on details. But after that afternoon, she started looking for Everett Vale's shadow. She didn't mean to at first. She would be making coffee and glance outside. She would carry laundry past the side window and pause. She would step onto her back porch to water the basil and find her eyes moving toward his yard. At 7 in the morning, when the sun came low over the houses across the street, the shrubs threw long shadows over his grass. Everett stood near his driveway holding a newspaper. The newspaper cast a folded shape across his shoes. His shoes cast nothing. At 4 in the afternoon, he walked to the mailbox. The mailbox shadow stretched almost to the curb. His body made no mark beside it. At dusk, when the neighborhood turned gold and everything seemed to grow twice as long, every fence post and porch rail dragged darkness across the ground. Everett Vale passed through all of it untouched. The strangest part was how normal he looked. He watered the grass. He brought in trash bins. He nodded politely when people passed on the sidewalk. He never hurried. He never seemed nervous. If he knew what was missing from him, he carried the knowledge like a set of house keys. By the second week of watching, Dottie hated how much she thought about him. She tried to make herself stop. She moved her desk away from the window in the front room. She closed the blinds in the kitchen. She told herself that grown women with bills and deadlines didn't build their days around a neighbor's shadow. Then one evening, while taking out the recycling, she found Everett standing on the other side of the chain-link fence. He was close enough that she could smell his aftershave, something sharp and old-fashioned, like bay rum and cedar. The sun was behind Dottie. Her own shadow fell cleanly across the grass, crossed under the fence, and reached almost to his shoes. Everett looked down at it. He didn't look at her face first. He looked at the shadow. Then he smiled. He told her in a mild voice that she had a strong one. Dottie stared at him, unsure what he meant. He said some shadows held their shape better than others. The recycling bin lid slipped from her hand and clapped shut. The sound made her jump harder than it should have. Everett's smile widened by the smallest amount, as if he had expected that. Dottie told him she needed to get back inside. He said that was wise, especially before dark. She went into the house and locked the back door. Then she locked the front door too, even though Everett had made no threat. He had only stood there in daylight and spoken about her shadow as if it were a thing he could judge. That night, Dottie remembered something her grandmother used to say when Dottie was little. Her grandmother had been a mountain woman from eastern Kentucky, the sort who kept scissors under mattresses and turned mirrors to the wall during thunderstorms. She had dozens of rules, most of them delivered while cooking, cleaning, or shelling beans. Never sweep over a person's feet. Never let a hat sit on the bed. Never step across a child while they're sleeping unless you step back over them again. And one rule about shadows. Dottie had been young when she heard it, maybe 6 or 7. She remembered standing barefoot in the yard at sunset while her grandmother pinned sheets on a clothesline. Dottie had been making animal shapes with her hands and laughing at the long black figure she made on the grass. Her grandmother had told her to be careful where she let that thing fall. At the time, Dottie asked why. Her grandmother said some people knew how to take a shadow if it touched the wrong door. Dottie had forgotten that for nearly 30 years. Now she sat in her living room with all the lamps on, staring at her own shadow stretched across the hardwood floor. It lay there exactly where it should, connected to her feet, moving when she moved. She lifted one hand, and the shadow lifted its hand. Then she lowered it, and the shadow also lowered its hand. Then, just before she looked away, the fingers on the floor spread wider than hers. Dottie froze. She raised her hand again, slowly this time. The shadow followed, but a breath late. A small delay, the kind of delay that made her doubt what she had seen because it corrected itself almost immediately. She stood up too fast, and the shadow snapped back under her. For the next few days, she kept the curtains closed. That helped during daylight. At night, it made things worse. Every lamp in the house created another version of her. One shadow on the wall from the standing lamp. Another across the hall from the kitchen light. Another thin one beside the bedroom door when the bathroom light was on. She started turning lights off behind her. Then she started turning them all on because darkness felt worse. Everett Vale went on living next door. Dottie heard his car in the driveway. She heard his sprinkler ticking in the yard. She saw his porch light come on through the edges of the blinds. She told herself that she was letting a strange comment and an old superstition poison her common sense. Then, on Thursday morning, She opened the kitchen curtains and saw her own shadow standing in Everett Vale's yard. It was on the grass near his back steps. There was no body above it. The morning sun came from behind Dottie's house, bright and low. Her actual body stood at the kitchen window. Her actual feet were planted on faded linoleum. But across the fence, on the neighbor's lawn, a dark human shape stretched away from nothing. It was the right height, the right outline, the same loose bun at the back of the head, the same robe sleeves, wide at the wrists. Dottie stepped back from the window. The shadow in Everett's yard stayed where it was. Her breath went shallow. She looked down at the kitchen floor. There was a shadow at her feet, but it was thin and pale, barely darker than the linoleum. It looked like something left after a spill had been wiped up badly. Outside, the shadow in the grass lifted its head. No face showed, of course. It was only darkness on grass. But Dottie felt it looking back. Then Everett Vale's back door opened. He stepped out carrying a white coffee mug. The mug cast a bright little shadow over his hand. The porch rail cast stripes over the steps. Everett himself made no shape at all. He looked at the shadow standing in his yard and nodded once, as if greeting a guest who had arrived early. Dottie closed the curtain so hard the rod tore loose on one side. She spent the rest of the morning away from the windows. She tried to work, but every email looked like a set of marks with no meaning. Around noon, she called the property management company for the house next door and asked about the new owner. The woman on the phone said the house had been purchased through a private trust, and she couldn't share anything else. Dottie asked whether the previous owner had known him. The woman paused and said the widow had been afraid of the house near the end, though old age could make people afraid of familiar things. Dottie asked what the widow had said. The woman lowered her voice, almost embarrassed, and said the widow kept insisting someone was walking around with her husband's shadow. That was when the line went dead. Dottie checked the screen. The call had ended, but her phone still had service. Outside, Everett's sprinkler started ticking. Dottie went to the hallway closet and pulled out a box of things from her grandmother's house. She had kept it for years without sorting through it properly. Old photographs, recipe cards, a cracked rosary, a biscuit tin full of buttons, a folded apron that still smelled faintly of cedar chips. At the bottom, she found a small envelope with her grandmother's handwriting on it. Inside were paper charms, brittle with age, cut into rough human shapes. Each one had a name written across the chest. Dottie didn't recognize most of them. One charm was blank. On the back of the envelope, her grandmother had written a warning in pencil. The words were faded, but Dottie could still read enough. If a shadow stands without the body, don't call it back after sundown. Stand in salt before sunrise. Keep your feet covered. Don't let the taker step across it. Dottie read the lines 3 times. By then, the sunlight was already changing. She poured salt from the blue cardboard canister in the pantry and made a ring on the kitchen floor. It looked ridiculous. It looked like something a frightened child would do after a bad dream. Still, she stepped into it barefoot and waited. Her faint shadow lay inside the ring with her. For a while, the house held steady. Then the back porch creaked. Dottie turned her head toward the kitchen window. The curtain hung crooked from the rod she had half torn down. Through the gap, she could see Everett Vale standing in his yard, near the fence. He held something dark in one hand. At first, she thought it was a piece of cloth. Then he shook it loose, and it lengthened in the air without moving like cloth at all. It hung from his hand in a flat, human shape. Dottie's shape. Her shadow on the kitchen floor thinned until she could see the grain of the linoleum through it. Everett stepped closer to the fence. The shadow in his hand stretched toward him. Dottie remembered the warning. Don't let the taker step across it. She grabbed the broom from beside the refrigerator and thrust the handle through the gap in the curtain. She knocked over the potted basil on the windowsill and sent dirt across the sink, but she managed to shove the curtain aside. Everett had one polished shoe raised over the dark shape on the grass. Dottie slammed the broom handle against the window glass. The crack that spread across the panes startled them both. Everett looked up at her. His expression changed. For the first time since he moved in, he looked irritated. Dottie backed out of the salt ring and ran for the back door. The moment her foot crossed the salt, the house seemed to tilt. Her shadow on the floor pulled long and wrong behind her, pointing toward the window instead of away from the hall light. It caught under the table legs. It dragged across the threshold like something hooked. She unlocked the back door with shaking hands and stepped onto the porch. Everett stood at the fence, still holding the dark shape. Up close, it was worse. It had the outline of her shoulders, her head, her arms. It even had the slight unevenness where her robe sleeve had slipped down one wrist. He told her she should have stayed inside until it settled. Dottie didn't answer. She lifted the broom and swung it over the fence. The straw end passed through the hanging shadow. Everett flinched as if she had struck his hand. The dark shape dropped onto the grass. For 1 second, it lay there between them, connected to no one. Then it moved. It crawled toward Dottie's feet. She stumbled backward, nearly falling down the porch steps. The shadow slid under the fence, crossed the strip of weeds between the houses, and reached the edge of her porch. Everett stepped over it. The instant his shoe crossed the shadow, Dottie felt something pull hard behind her ribs. It wasn't pain exactly. It was the feeling of standing up too quickly, mixed with the sick drop of missing a stair in the dark. Her knees weakened. Her hands went cold. The porch, the fence, and Everett's narrow face all seemed to draw away from her at once. Her shadow stopped crawling toward her. It turned back toward him. Dottie tried to step forward, but her body wouldn't obey quickly. She gripped the porch rail and watched Everett bend down. He didn't pick the shadow up with his hands this time. He simply stood over it. The dark shape rose from the grass and fastened itself to his feet. For the first time, Everett Vale cast a shadow. It wasn't shaped like him. It was shaped like Dottie. He smiled, and the thing on the ground smiled with him. Those shadows had no mouths and should have had no way to show it. Dottie got herself back inside and locked the door. She poured more salt across the threshold, then across the windowsills, then in a trembling line along the baseboards. She stayed away from every lamp until the house went blue with evening. By dark, she had almost no shadow left. In the bathroom mirror, she looked the same at first. Same tired eyes, same hair coming loose from its knot, same face gone pale from fear. But when she lifted her hand near the vanity light, the wall behind her stayed empty. No shape followed. Outside, Everett's porch light came on. Dottie didn't want to look. She looked anyway. Everett Vale stood in his front yard under the yellow porch light, facing her house. The light behind him should have thrown his shadow toward the street. Instead, 2 long shadows stretched from his feet across the lawn and reached toward Dottie's windows. One was hers. The other was smaller, bent at the shoulders, with the outline of a woman who might have been old enough to own that house before him. Everett raised one hand. Both shadows raised theirs a moment later, and neither one belonged to him. Feral by Night is the sister podcast to The Feral Folklorist. You can find information on both podcasts on feralfolklorist.com. And if you'd like to see the animated video versions of these stories, consider becoming a patron on my Patreon at patreon.com/PapaG. And if you're ever in the market for metaphysical supplies, our store, Aromagees Botanica, has been weaving magic for over 25 years. That's over at aromagees.com.